In Richmond draai die windpomp en ek voel hoe waai die wind teen my gesig. Die silwer van die dakke en die bloekoms by die golfklub teen die lug. En oorkant teen die berg in wit klip staan geverf Richmond. 1843, dit was 'n lang tyd terug. Terug na Richmond wil ek gaan. Terug na Richmond, waar mense my verstaan. Waar jarelange vriende en die winde op my wag. Terug na Richmond wil ek gaan. Die windpomp draai op Richmond en ek voel hoe waai die wind teen my gesig. Die silwer van die dakke en die bloekoms by die golfklub teen die lug. En oorkant teen die berg in wit klip staan geverf Richmond. 1843, dit was 'n lang tyd terug. Terug na Richmond wil ek gaan. Terug na Richmond, waar mense my verstaan. Waar jarelange vriende en die winde op my wag. Terug na Richmond wil ek gaan. Na Richmond wil ek gaan. Terug na Richmond, waar mense my verstaan. Waar jarelange vriende en die winde op my wag. Terug na Richmond wil ek gaan. Na Richmond wil ek gaan. Na Richmond wil ek gaan.
She came down in her robe and raced straight over to look after Yvonne. So we won't charge them for their time with us. I think they've given excellent service, and Yvonne was with good hands, in very good hands now. So the worrying thing is that now the load of administration and organisation falls to me, which is extremely dangerous. So anything that could happen. So including I found this is my car. I have no idea whether it's today or for another weekend if you like. all, the warm welcome to everyone on this hall, particularly our international organisation for podcast delegates. We've got a full day today with some delegates to do, and of course we'll launch with the particular school, which is the more season, and then a very brief day tomorrow, and then the general assembly on Monday. I'll just introduce this delegates as I may. Darryl, obviously from South Africa, Warren from in Victoria, Australia, Adrian from Wellington in Scotland, Pavelita and Maria from Chilope in Bulgaria, and Ganel from Morley in Sweden. And we'll have many more coming into decision live streams. So all those around the world coming into decision by live stream are very, very welcome to you. A brief introduction to Darryl David. I spoke about serendipity a little earlier. We found Darryl by serendipity. We reached out obviously to all of the hotels around the world to like to New Zealand, and Darryl's founding partner of Richmond, the Hotel South Africa, reached out to us, and we discovered that Darryl not only is an accomplished academic at the University of Western Cape, he is also the founder of Richmond, so the African Hospital owned, and involved many other literary figures in South Africa. So we thought it would be brilliant to get Darryl here, but both as a representative of Richmond, but also to enlighten us literary tourism. And as you know, I googled literary tourism a little while ago, and there are a lot of comes up on literary tourism. It's a growing part of tourists, tourism category, and of course literary tourism is something that is also extremely important. So I think Jean-Paul Sartre described you as a novel idea. This is a man not only of deep thought, but also a lot of action. So we're looking to both your enlightening our hearts, but also inspiring to action what we need to do in our communities and also in our hotels. For our delegates, this is just a very quick introduction. We're standing in the historic exit hall. This is the supper room. Next door is the key wall, and that's the exit hall. This is the exit seat, I guess, the whole building. Not far down the road, and in New Zealand, this can be terrible, this area, and lots of people drive by it. But our largest ever military camp was down the road. 80,000 men and women, young men and women, went through that camp, the First World War, in 1960 to 1990, and then they had to go overseas. They marched from each contingent marched from the camp. I think one of you said it was terrifying. Yeah, so we'll take a little slide. So when they finished their training, each contingent marched over the river to the Wellington port to get the treasure. And I know that one or two delegates found their drive over the hill. One of them described it as terrifying. Please, I think you did. So they marched. Anyway, the first families of the time put money in to build this building as a club for the soldiers, for those training in the camp. So we're so lucky to have this left to us today. And we're going up to the Matthews farm this afternoon, and I think the Matthews family were one of those early donors for this this lovely facility here. And true to its time, if you're an officer, you can go through there. If you're other ranks, you sort of have to mingle out there. And I'm not sure what the supper room was, but anyway, we're here today. So. I'll be quiet and we'll get Darryl onto the microphone. And could we warmly welcome Darryl David, please?
So in South Africa, it's not as rosy as you think. I'm sort of known as the most unacademic academic in South Africa. That means I publish very little, but I get the job done. And good morning to International Organization of Booktown Delegates. A good morning to the chairperson of Featherston Booktown in New Zealand. I thank all of you for your warm welcome thus far. Welcome to all the booksellers and anyone listening online. Welcome. And the first bit might be a bit theoretical, but I promise to make up for it for at least 75% of the talk, which will be highly entertaining. That much I promise. Otherwise, they've said that they will never invite me again. So I'm under huge pressure here. So let me start with literary tourism. According to Clifford, what is commonly referred to as literary tourism is the logical extension of cultural tourism, as Peter just mentioned, capitalizing on the links between authors, their literary works, and the landscapes that have made them famous. Literary places can be defined in a multitude of ways. According to Herbert, literary tourism involves visiting both those places associated with writers in their real lives and those which provided settings for their novels. Thus, one may be drawn to visit Robert Frost's grave in Vermont, tiptoe in awe through the rooms of Tolstoy's house in St. Petersburg, visit Shakespeare's home in Stratford-upon-Avon, or maybe pay your respects to Ernest Hemingway's grave in Idaho, or visit the Dublin of Yeats and Joyce. People visit literary places for a variety of reasons. Firstly, literary tourists are drawn to places that have strong connections with the lives of writers. Former homes in which a writer lived and worked usually inspire awe and reverence in tourists, and the nostalgia associated with these homes prove irresistible to tourists. A theorist by the name of Marsh sums it up quite eloquently when he states, "In these places, a visitor can still walk out of a house and into landscapes which have barely changed since the writer drew breath from them and breathed literature into them. We walk in our writer's footsteps and see through their eyes when we enter these spaces." It's a beautiful quotation. I'll read that first line one more time. In these places, a visitor can still walk out of a house and into landscapes which have barely changed since the writer drew breath from them and breathed literature into them. Secondly, tourists may be drawn to literary spaces that form the settings for novels. These novels may be set in locations that the writers knew and onto which an imaginative landscape is grafted. In fact, fictional characters and events often generate the strongest imagery. Thirdly, tourists may be drawn to places for reasons that fall outside of the literary. In the home of Beatrix Potter in Cumbria, for example, Robinson noted that tourists were recalling memories and emotions from their childhood. Their recollection was of the telling of the stories and the bonds with home and family. Fourthly, literary places may also become stopping points along a more general tourism route, a literary location that fits into a route encompassing cathedrals, churches, country houses, and gardens, and overall architectural splendor is bound to attract tourists. Okay? So that gives you an early sense of what is literary tourism, but we can go wider. Okay? In literature, we also have what is called literary biographies, and they form the cornerstone as well of literary tourism. Biographical criticism has not always been popular in academia. given the influence of literary theories such as Russian formalism and new criticism that afford primacy to the text. But literary tourism places the author firmly in the public domain. In recent years, book signings and public readings by authors have become commonplace as part of a process of the demystification of public personalities. Literary tourism allows us to indulge in the human aspect of literature. Robinson phrases this so beautifully when he says, "We can freely indulge in the biography of the author, visit locations where the author went, tell ourselves that by being in the presence of the great writer's quill, we are also somehow closer to the hand that held it and the great talent that created the work." Secondly, our understanding of what can be termed literary has in recent decades been extended to include diaries, letters, advertisements, etc. For the literary tourist, this extends the range of text that can be included in the tourist presentation of the author and lends authenticity to the tourist experience, which fuels demand. Thirdly, there exists a form of what theorists call a literary tourism of the mind, made famous by books such as Asher's Literary Houses, More Literary Houses, and Children's Literary Houses. In these books, these artists reconstruct settings down to the minutest detail in the form of beautiful, colorful sketches. Literary tourism also includes the travel writings, the factual accounts of traveling by creative writers. Occasionally, these travels find expression in the fictional works of these writers at a later stage. Graham Greene's extensive traveling, for instance, which directly links to his fictional works, so that Sierra Leone, where he worked during the Second World War, provided the setting for his novel, The Heart of the Matter. And his journeys through Mexico in 1938 provided the inspiration for the novel, The Power and the Glory. I now want to move on to the relationship between space and place. And this lies at the heart of what we consider literary tourism. So I'm going to read a series of quotes, but I think they give a good sense of the relationship between space and place. Quotation: "If there is any universal truth about writers, it is that they are place-bound. In every sense, a writer's place colors the voice with which he writes. His origins provide the rooms, the streets, and the faces that his imagination worked into art." A quote by Eisenberg. And then another quote: "Alongside the prophets and queens, storytellers, dreamers, travelers, thinkers, life's legendary witnesses are mankind's original celebrities, the one we have carried in our hearts throughout the ages, cherishing their work, teaching their names to our children and our children's children. Virgil, Homer, Ovid, Plato, Dante, Shakespeare, Austen, Charlotte and Emily Bronte, Leo Tolstoy, Federico Garcia Lorca, to name but a few from the canon. Their fame is inseparable from Western civilization's glory." And while those names are only from the Western canon, I think you get a sense of what they're trying to promote when they talk about the relationship between space and place. But recently, this book that's come out of South Africa, it's called Place, South African Literary Journeys, is probably the best book that I have read for the man in the street wanting to understand this relationship between space and place. And so I'm just going to read a few quotations for you to give you a sense of how exactly we can, what I use positively, how we can commodify space and place as people working in the genre of literary tourism. So I'm going to read something for you now, and it gives you a good idea of what I'm talking about. So the author is talking about his love for traveling to places associated with famous writers in South Africa. And he says it was influenced by his childhood. And this is what he says. Children respond instinctively to beauty, an imprinting that stays with them for life, and powerful early encounters with place help to mold their sensory palates. Indeed, our habits, customs, and thoughts, as well as our language, tastes, and perceptions, are shaped by the terroir we first inhabit. In her essay, The Spirit of Place, poet Alice Meynell suggests that there is no more delicate perceiver of locality than a child. He is well used to words and voices that he does not understand, and this is a condition of his simplicity. And when those unknown words are bells, loud in the night, they are to him as homely and as old as lullabies. Douglas Pocock develops this idea in Place and the Novelist. And this is what he says. Although a hierarchy of places emerges as our engagement with the world enlarges beyond our earliest activities, a crucial and indelible bond is established. Is established with early place or home, as we most commonly use the term. It remains the center of our egocentrically ordered cosmos, containing our own unique, unrepeatable beginning. We may move, but we cannot begin again a second time. In a sense, we are rooted and grounded in place and by place. Our childhood sense of wonder, the capacity to see with fresh eyes, is unique and precious. We do not choose where we are born, but so potent is the imprinting by the environment that few of us wish to have been born elsewhere. Even hardship and sorrow play a part in deepening our love of place. This intense feeling of harmony with our first patch of earth contributes to a sense of wholeness and of having a place. In a sense, we become endemics, adapted to our particular corner of the globe. Seen in this light, our beings have true meaning and value only in their proper home, in a symbiotic relationship with their landscape and ecosystem, with the fauna, flora, and topography of their place. The story of who I am, my very sense of self, depends on the places my story is set. Such sites hold memories and are integrally linked to my sense of identity. The thoughts that seem to belong to me most intimately, insofar as they concern my own life story, are lodged as much in place as in my mind. The same applies to cultural narratives of every conceivable kind, literature the most important. All our founding narratives are set in the aspect of place, and in this respect, they become sacred to us. Home is an irreplaceable center. Particular houses, gardens, topographies, and scents are so deeply familiar that body and place, body and home appear inseparable. This is especially strong and true for the places of childhood, but it applies throughout our lives. And you know, when I read this, when I imagined the International Organization of Book Towns, I imagined a book festival. And I see that Featherston is taking us on lots of tours. And I wondered why they did that. And when I read this, I understood that in order to understand the place that will inspire writers from this part of the world. People coming to visit the place have to understand the place. So by going on tours, that's the surest way to get a deeper sense of place. Martin Connolly's wife just gave me a book based on historical fiction. Martin, I forgot the name of the man who planted the trees. Samuel Oates. I was hoping his name would be Oak, but anyway, you can't have it all your own way. Okay, so that is just one of the quotations that I wanted to share with you. And then I wanted to share another with you. Just bear with me till I find it. Okay. Every continent has its own great spirit of place, D.H. Lawrence writes. Every people is polarized in some particular locality, which is home, the homeland. Different places on the face of the earth have different vital effluence, different vibration, different chemical exhalation, different polarity with different stars. Call it what you like, but the spirit of place is a great reality. He goes on to suggest that it is the business of art, and the novel in particular, to reveal this complex relation between humans and their environment. Okay, and then I'm coming to the end of the very theoretical section, and then I will move on to the more entertaining part. Okay, this is what the author says about this book. He says, "My own cultural map of South Africa is a patchwork comprising disparate scraps of literature, art, television programs, music, film, and photographs. Such a map would include evocative poems of place, such as Drummer Hodge, Winternag, Plaashek, Sweetwater, and A Handvol Grys, as well as, now some of the titles are Afrikaans, so it's not going to make sense to you, okay? All of it mixed into the potjie. Potjie is like a pot to make stew. Along with my own travel memories, many of them from journeys undertaken at a young age, when my mind's door was wide open and the topophilic winds blew new and strong and true." The topophilic winds, topophilia simply means a love of landscape, a love of place, okay? And then one of my favorite, or two of my favorite authors, but let me just go to the Breitenbach one. Breitenbach. This is what he says. "In A Season in Paradise, Breitenbach writes of his return to South Africa after many years abroad. And this is what he says. "This earth speaks as no earth anywhere else. My people lie buried in this ground. I love this soil, this land with its people, as the eye loves the light." And I think you get a deep sense of the emotional attachment that many writers have to place. And so that is a bit of theory about literary tourism and the field and how it operates, etc. But now I want to move on to the next section, and I just want to have a look at my time. Okay. So much of what I'm going to tell you now is not going to be theoretical, but from the story, you will get a sense of the different facets of literary tourism through this book. So this book, Boek Bedonderd, it's called, because Boek Bedonderd is the name of my first festival that I started in Booktown, Richmond. In South Africa, everyone knows me as Mr. Boek Bedonderd, okay? Because it's an Afrikaans word. Boek Bedonderd, it means crazy about books, okay? It means crazy about books, but I've just softened it for you. Actually, I hope that you'll get the meaning if I tell you what it means in Afrikaans. It means boek befok. Boek befok means, fucking crazy about books. Okay? I'm just softening it for you. So when I started the festival, I thought it was the wittiest name for a book festival. And then I had to come up against the dominee. Dominee is like the priest in South Africa. And the townspeople, they were very upset because it was a swear word. And then I had to get linguists to tell them, no, it actually means crazy about books. We understand the boek befok, but it means crazy about books. So it's quite a controversial title. And I brought tissues along because it's a spiritual book for me. I wrote this book, 350 pages, 250 pages of text. I wrote it in 14 days last year. Unbelievable. People don't believe me. They said I was going to embarrass myself, but so far, got good reviews so far. So touch wood, that everything that you're going to hear is going to be impressive enough. Okay, so let me just get all my stuff ready now. So now I'm going to share with you the journey that goes back over 20 years, and you will get a sense of where I started. So I'm going to read extracts for you from the book, and then later on, I have a large PowerPoint presentation with lots of photographs for you to give you a sense of the spirit of place in South Africa. Okay. The start of a dream. So I'll just start in the middle. And then one day, I don't remember how I stumbled upon the concept, but I came across those two words that changed my life. Book Town. The more I read about Hay-on-Wye on the border of Wales and that genius Richard Booth, the maverick who turned it into a book town with just one bookshop and promptly pronounced himself as the king of hay and even created the town's own currency, the more I knew I wanted to be Richard Booth, an Indian Richard Booth, a South African Richard Booth. I remember the day so clearly that I went to my parents' house and told them I had something very important to tell them. I could see the terror in my mother's eyes. She walked to her bedroom. She clasped her two hands together. My dad was lying on the bed. I think they must have thought I had lost my job or was having an affair or had fathered a child out of wedlock. And then I told them, Mom, Dad, I think I'm going to be famous. By the time I finished telling them my vision, they seemed completely unimpressed, but also extremely relieved that whatever dreadful scene they had envisioned turned out to be some stupid idea about a book town. By now, my nephew Wesley had heard the commotion and popped into the kitchen to take the conversation further. Bet you're going to fail, he scoffed. One could not blame the boy. After all, while I was a lecturer, I did start a business that offered my services in naming businesses, personalized number plates, and names for boats, etc. And then I was a florist for a year, and then I owned a photographic studio for a year. Oddly enough, none of them brought me the profits that I was so sure would materialize. Fortunately, I was born with that one trait that most Pisceans are born with. We are incurable dreamers. Okay, and that is how the journey started. And this is not fiction. It took me 14 days because it's a part of my life. So I can just relate the stories to you. So Martin asked me the question when he was taking me around, why Richmond? And I'm now going to answer that question, why Richmond? In October 2003, I bought a Honda Jazz. It proved to be the greatest car I have ever owned. In 4 short years, We covered an unbelievable 326,000 kilometers, mostly in pursuit of the town that would become the national book town of South Africa. From Howick, my hometown, to Colesberg is roughly 800 kilometers. The reason why I'm telling you this is the book town is based in a region in South Africa known as the Karoo. And the Karoo starts at the town Colesberg, okay? And then we had to venture out in every direction imaginable in search of what had become my magnificent obsession. Initially, I was drawn to all the tourists, the towns tourists love. And I talk about them here: Graafrenet, Prince Albert, Philippopolis, Cradock, Hanover. We pronounce it as Hanover, the German Hannover, okay? But one of the hallmarks of all book towns is cheap real estate. And cheap property was impossible in all the trending towns. When I started searching for a town, property in the Karoo was dirt cheap. Magnificent houses could be bought for 50,000 rand. To give you an indication, that is about 4,000 New Zealand dollars, okay? That is how cheap. And that was expensive for the time. I got in a bit late. Other people bought properties for 20,000, okay? But then the property boom hit. Within 2 years, property prices in the Karoo had gone through the proverbial roof. This was due to one of the biggest estate agencies, Pam Golding Properties, coming into the Karoo. Incidentally, the name Karoo, K-A-R-O-O, means land of thirst because it is a semi-desert area. Children in the Karoo hardly ever see rain their entire lives. When it does rain, they go outside and they play in the water like they've never seen rain falling from the sky, and many of them have never seen rain falling from the sky. That is how dry it is. So I soon learned that booksellers would never be able to afford property in the popular Karoo towns. Sadly, though, I was soon to discover that my dark brown skin was also going to be a problem with all their agents. Once they heard I was looking to start a book town, miraculously every single property I inquired about was suddenly sold, but remained on the website for months thereafter. Sometimes a property would have just been loaded onto the Pam Golding website. I would phone immediately and be informed that the property had just been sold. A few weeks later, this just been sold property would resurface on the website. One day, my luck changed. It had always been my dream to create a book town in Hanover in the Northern Cape. To my mind, the fact that the famous South African author Olive Schreiner lived in Hanover was a deal clincher. Olive Schreiner, the first literary superstar to emerge from South Africa, was the woman who gained worldwide fame with the publication of her novel, The Story of an African Farm. And it would give people a belief that a book town could work in a town where one of the greatest writers in South Africa had lived. Okay. And so what I did was I changed my email address from david.d@ukzn. I changed it to cowboys@sai.co.za because in South Africa, Davids is a common colored surname. So they would know, they would think I was a colored person. I'm Indian of origin, okay? And so I changed it to Cowboys. It was the perfect thing, a perfect name. Everyone loved it, okay? Cowboys@SAI. And then one day I found that the house of Olive Schreiner was on the market. And so I phoned the man immediately and I said, I'll buy it. Because you could see it on the internet. And I said, I'll drive down tomorrow. When I say I drive down, that's a 1,000-kilometer journey. I'll drive down tomorrow, and if everything looks fine, I'll buy the property. Okay, so that is what I told him. And then when I got there, I jumped out of my Honda Jazz and I said, "Hi, I'm Darryl. We spoke about your house over the phone." He looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, the house has just got sold," the man said, without shaking my hand. "But we had a contract. I drove over 900 kilometers to see the house." Sorry, there was a cash buyer. I could see the confused expression on my wife's face, but I knew Indians were not welcome in Hanover, and certainly not worthy of owning Olive Schreiner's home. And so that is how Hanover lost the right to become South Africa's book town. I always remind them of it whenever, because the distance between Hanover and Richmond is about 70 kilometers. So they regularly come to the book festival. And I always love to tell the story of how it was that this came to be in Richmond. And then the important day. And so on the day after my 10th wedding anniversary, I bought a house in Richmond in the Northern Cape. Little did I know then that this would be the first of many journeys to a town everyone confused with its namesake in KwaZulu-Natal. There's another town in another province called Richmond. Very often publishers would send the books to the wrong Richmond, and then we'd be really embarrassed. The reason why I wanted to buy a property was because I needed to lead by example and open my own bookshop. I reasoned that if people were reluctant to sell property to an Indian, what chance would I stand trying to rent a property? At the back of my mind, I was also worried that if I was not part of the town, people could block me from branding the town as a book town. The next morning, after driving through Richmond the previous day, I opened my laptop and found an email from one Saag Versace, a typical Afrikaans surname, of Seif Properties. Attached were a clutch of photos of the property. When I saw the view of the church from the property, I somehow felt comforted, a quiet confidence. When I saw that the property stretched from one street to another with stables, I was ecstatic. But in order to close the deal, he needed my ID. And my identity document would give away the fact that this Darryl Earl David was a dark-skinned Indian, the likes of which no resident of Richmond in the Karoo had ever laid their eyes on. But Saag was a man of his word, not a racist bone in his body. While every single agent in the Karoo had made sure I would never own property in their town, Saag Versace saw me as just another buyer. However, when the history of Booktown Richmond one day gets written, I intend to include a big photo of the man who opened the first page of the book that became known as Booktown Richmond. And in the book, I've got a photograph of him in the book here. Okay, and then you need to know that I didn't do this just on my own. I met a wonderful man by the name of Peter Baker. Adrian has met him. So I want to tell you the story of how Peter and I came together. Okay, so I call the chapter The Mad Canadian Vet. For years, I had been hearing rumors of a mad Canadian vet. Honestly, that's what people used to call him, the mad Canadian vet, who was buying up property in the Karoo, and who was also crazy about books. At the time, I was really scared. What if someone with more money beat me to the idea of starting a book town? It would be a case of 5 wasted years searching for the right town. And then one day I decided I would phone him up after seeing an article in a magazine called Country Life. I don't remember the exact month I picked up the phone, and I phoned the Supper Club. This is the restaurant that Peter Baker owns. After about 10 rings, I was about to put the phone down when a lady answered. I asked to speak to Peter Baker, then heard a male voice on the other end of the line. "Baker? Hi, is that Peter Baker?" "Yes, speaking," said the voice in a heavy Canadian accent. "Dr. Baker, my name is Darryl David. I'm a lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I saw your Country Life article and I decided to give you a call. I want to start a book town in Richmond and I was wondering if you would like to join forces with me. A what? A book town, like Hay on Wye. Over the handset, loud music and even louder laughter could be heard in the background. Through a kind of spitting sound, usually when Peter's drunk, Peter Baker said, I'm busy right now. Leave your name and number with me. Girl, get my pen. Calls his wife girl. I call my daughter girl, he calls his wife girl. Okay, I'll call you back. Oh no, I thought to myself, I blew it. He's not going to call back. He must think I'm a raving lunatic. With a heavy heart, I put the phone down and trudged off to bed. The next day, I was sitting in my office at work. My door was closed to keep the negative energy out. Sorry, there was another chapter about bad academic environment. My landline rang. Just great, I thought. Must be my dean phoning to inform me that he had received more complaints about me from students. Not that I'm a bad lecturer. I once made a joke to a student. She had auburn hair, and one day she came to class with blonde hair. And she kept on getting all the answers wrong. And I said to her, you see what happens when you dye your hair blonde. And she went and reported me to the dean, and they wanted to send me for counseling and things. So that's what it's all about. Okay. So he says, hello, I'm looking for Darryl David. That Canadian accent was unmistakable. You called yesterday. Can you tell me again what you want to do? I couldn't believe it. Peter Baker had phoned back. I want to start a book town in Richmond. It will be the first in South Africa and the first on the African continent. Essentially, we have to create a town full of bookshops, and these bookshops will in turn bring in tourists. Why Richmond, he asked. Well, usually you choose a town in economic decline. The model of a town full of books acts as a driver of regeneration. Wow, that's a whale of an idea. Let's do it. And there, just like that, two men who had never met before shook hands over the telephone and decided to start a book town in the forgotten town of Richmond in the Karoo. But now, after almost 5 years of searching and searching, Peter Baker was the first man who uttered those immortal words. That's a whale of an idea. And that is how, literally, we started Booktown Richmond. I must tell you, like here, Peter Biggs is the chairperson of, and some countries use the term director. In South Africa, we don't know what we are. We just know that we started the damn thing, and every year we organize a book festival, okay? So we don't have committees, we don't meet, we just phone each other, and we say this is what we're going to do almost every day for the next year, and that's how we put the book festival together. We don't meet in town at all. So we call ourselves the last of the amateurs. That is what we are. But when people look at us a bit funny, we tell them the Titanic was built by professionals, Noah's Ark was built by an amateur. And that usually shuts them up. Okay. And then besides this moment, the moment that changed my life. So in order to do this, I had no idea. In those days, the internet wasn't that powerful. We're talking about 2005. And I needed to know what a book town looked like. And so I visited a few of the European book towns, okay? But now I'm going to read a short story for you. And it's going to tell you, it's the first short story I ever wrote. And they robbed me of first prize, I must tell you, because most people say that it's my best story, but that year they gave it to someone else. It's called The Slow Gardener. July 25th, 2007, 6:30 p.m., Amsterdam. I am sitting with a plate of curry in front of me. after eating so-called European cuisine for the past 8 days. I phoned my wife and daughter. Be back home in just over 24 hours, I say to Sharitha. And what are you doing, girl? I ask my daughter. Henry and I are lighting a fire with all the old wood, she replies. Tell Henry to burn it over Ruffles and Goldie's grave to keep them warm, I tell her. Henry Keys entered my life sometime during my first year at university. He started out as a gardener for our neighbors, but ended up staying at my parents' home. My earliest memory of him was as a midwife when he helped deliver my golden cocker spaniel, Goldie's pups. Boy, he sure loved Goldie and the father of the litter, Ruffles, our golden Labrador. I remember coming home one day when I was still living with my parents in Bombay Road to find Henry passed out on the lawn after partying too hard. And at his side were Goldie and Ruffles. That image will forever remain burnt on my retina. A few years later, Henry was banished from my parents' home. We awoke one night to the screams of our new domestic worker, Mary. She was hysterical, claiming that Henry tried to rape her. I never believed her. Time was to reveal that she had a traumatic past and that she would periodically have these bouts of anxiety. I suppose I should have felt sorry for her, but I never forgave her or my parents for not showing their loyalty to a man who had become part of our family. But Henry forgave Mary. They would still speak for hours. What a big heart he must have had. And so it was that Henry Keys remained a part of our lives, even though he no longer lived with us. For those of you who don't know South Africa, Keys is a Zulu name. So this is a story of a black man, a Zulu. At my wedding, I thanked Henry for all that he had done to help me over the years. He sat with the rest of my family, for he was a guest, not a servant. Initially, my wife was opposed to the idea of Henry living with us, believing that her new husband would work as hard in the garden as her dad. She was soon to realize that I was only a craftsman with a pen in my hand. First, I cut the extension cord while mowing. Then I mowed over our sprinklers. Ask Henry if he would like to live with us, she conceded. What a joyous day that was for me and my Ruffles and Goldie. For weeks, they deserted the comfort of our bed to be with him. Now, as much as dogs are a source of joy, they also cause great pain, as we were to learn. When my adopted border collie developed cancer, it was Henry and I who dug the grave in the garden under his favorite tree. For weeks, the grave lay empty, waiting for me to muster the courage to euthanize the dog. And when that fateful day arrived, we buried him with tears in our eyes. Our move to Howick must have also been a sad chapter in Henry's life. His children, Ruffles and Goldie, were in the twilight years of their lives. For 9 months, we nursed Ruffles as his hind legs finally succumbed to cancer. Once again, Henry and I dug the grave, which this time remained empty for the entire 9 months. But when Goldie went into a deep coma, I phoned the vet without consulting my wife or Henry, for the two of them would only dissuade me from doing what was right. I remember Henry so vividly weeping like a child as the vet administered the stream of death. Through watery eyes, I remember seeing him taking out his handkerchief and walk to his room. Later that evening, with eyes that could cry no more, we buried our 2 children in silence, with mouths that could find no comfort for one another. Although he never said anything, he must have been lonely, although my new Basset Hound and St. Bernard must have filled a void. My daughter followed Henry like U follows Q. But Henry was also a man of leisure. He spent most of his time reading newspapers, just like me. Henry always said that his name was Henry Tisha Umkees. He said that he had always wanted to be a teacher, but could not afford to. My wife maintained that besides me, he was the laziest gardener she had ever seen. And she was right, I suppose. But how could I chastise someone who had walked with me through thick and thin, someone who had shared the greater part of my life? Johannesburg International. Finally, I whip out the cell phone. Instead of joy, I am met with tears. Henry is dead. He never woke up. My wife had to get the police and people from the mortuary. They had to break the door down. All I could think about was that I never said goodbye. I always shook hands and said goodbye to Henry. But this time, I never said goodbye. I was in such a rush, always in a rush. And now I would never get the chance to do so. The next day I went to the mortuary. The smell of death was terrible. They pulled out the table and my tears let him know that he was loved. How strange, I think to myself. For almost 20 years I never hugged this man who was like family to me. I kiss him on the cheek and make a promise not to let him suffer the indignity of a pauper's burial. And the rest of the story is basically about the burial of Henry. And that is how my life with the Booktown started. Henry and I, we were supposed to take all the books down and set up the bookshop. But he died when I came back from my European tour of Bredevoort, Redu, and Damme. Those were the 3 European book towns that I visited. And then I just, at the time, you'll see later on, I had a lot of problem with the tax man. My wife is an optometrist and she had her own business. And we bought the first VW Beetle, you know, the new shape Beetle. And you know, the tax man can be very petty, and I always tell people the car wasn't even expensive compared to a Mercedes. But for 10 years of our lives, they hounded us to such a point that we almost lost our house. And I was telling Martin or someone, the day I decided I wanted to change the direction of my life was I always needed to write out checks for my wife because in those days there wasn't online banking. And there came a time in my life when I asked myself, do I want to be signing checks for the rest of my life? And that is when I changed course in life. But I want to relay a story over here. Before Henry died, we were at our poorest, and he wanted an increase in salary. And we just didn't have money. And for the first time in our lives, Henry and I argued and fought about money. And so this is what I say. There is also the not so insignificant matter. And yet ever since Henry died, I can tell you I can do no wrong. Every festival I started, every great project I tried my hand at, just couldn't fail. Moreover, a month after Henry died, we got a letter from the taxman confirming that we owed them nothing. And I remember thinking at the time, if he had been alive, I could have compensated him for all the years I couldn't. There is also the not so insignificant matter of his tombstone. I left Amsterdam with virtually not a penny in my pocket. I had just enough petrol to drive from Johannesburg to Howick after the trip. Then I needed money to bury Henry. He had no family, but I did not have money for a tombstone. Many months later, when I did have the money and went to go and take a photo of Henry's grave, the grass had grown so long and the cemetery now was spilling onto the road. And so I could not put a tombstone on Henry's grave because I could not locate it after all these months. These matters of the heart, one never lives down, and I blame the taxman for this. If we had not suffered for years at their hands, I would have been able to afford a tombstone at the very time we buried him. At first, whenever we used to drive past the cemetery, I would always tell my family something about Henry as we drove past. Now, I can't bear to look that way, because how do you live down not giving a man who was like family to you a simple thing like a tombstone? Okay, so that is the story of Henry and how the book town started. Okay. How are your energy levels, people? Are you okay? Do you need an interlude?
Does anybody need a lavatory break or anything? I forgot to point out where the lavatories are.
Okay.
Through there or through there?
Okay.
Are we fine?
Okay. 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 This was the first article written about Booktown, Richmond, and it laid the blueprint for what we would become. And I want to read it because you get a sense of the tone of the article. It was written by a famous journalist called Dennis Beckett. This is a tale of the Karoo, of a dry, dusty bit of it. Ah, as I write, I feel Koppie beneath my feet. Koppie is a small hill. Clear, crisp view to forever. This is a tale of the Karoo and of beautiful lunatics, and of South Africa here and now. But it begins in another place and another generation. Hay on Wye is an undry and undusty picture postcard dorp on the England-Wales border. In 1960, Hay was coming up for its 900th birthday, but seemed unlikely to make it. The cattle trading industry, which had sustained the economy since frontier wars went out of fashion, was all pooped out. The town was teetering, so they got smart and said, let's make a book town. A what? There was no such thing. Half a millennium since Gutenberg, the notion book town had never been thought of. Hay thought of it. It made itself into a town built on books, talking books, reading books, ogling books, selling books. Now Hay has 20 full-time bookshops. Its annual festival fills 100,000 beds. You can see the exaggeration, okay? And the idea caught on, as good ideas do. By 2007, Hay was the granddaddy of 28 book towns, stretching from Japan to Archer, Texas, to South Korea and Redu, Belgium. There were book towns in every continent except Africa. And then along came a beautiful lunatic. When I was a student, a friend of mine approached a prominent person with an idea. The prominent person listened and said, where is the money in this? My friend was startled. It's not about money, it's about beauty. The prominent person said, what use is that? To spend time on things that make no money is a lunatic idea. Ever since, I've hoped the world will never run out of beautiful lunatics. Darryl David was already a rare figure as an Indian professor of Afrikaans. When he decided that what the Karoo needed was a book town, he became rarer. He took it seriously. No light whimsies here. Darryl examined prospective book towns, writing up his results on the internet and explaining why this one, that one, and the next one wouldn't do. Then he came to Richmond and he explained why it would do. This was a bold thing to explain. Insofar as Richmond's potential was pegged on Hay's success, there were also discrepancies. In a 2-hour drive of Hay, you had a population center called London. In a 2-hour drive of Richmond, you have a population center called Graafrenet. Now, Graafrenet is like a small town, population 2,000, okay? It was an ambitious basis upon which to create a book town. But Darryl David phoned around undeterred, and it turned out all roads in Richmond led to a particular person. They led to a Canadian vet in Parktown North, Johannesburg. Baker is an Africa convert and puts a convert's zeal into his hobbies. One of these is driving 4x4s to corners of Central Africa where cool drink cans burst in the sun as if they've been microwaved, and crossing a bridge can take a week. Another hobby is watching the sun go down from Vechkop, his manor house on the hill over Richmond, with beers and friends and deep satisfaction at the world and its work. Baker has a forename, Peter, which features on his degrees and his ID. In person, he is so solidly known as Baker that one can think he was christened Baker. He is a man in a hurry who answers his phone when he can find it and has remembered to turn it on by bellowing "what" in tones designed for declaring war. Darryl gulped before phoning Baker to propose a book town in Richmond. I knew that people would think, is this for real? And I know that people can be rude. Darryl didn't know that Baker has a third hobby, thwarting the Karoo's new industry. Money is being made in the Karoo at last. That should be exciting news, but shoulds are risky. This money is made by sabotage. You buy up a derelict cottage, demolish it, and sell the wood, mature yellow wood, often 100 years mature, ceilings and beams and floorboards, gold dust. Then you leave the crumpled daga walls like a kicked-down anthill, and the Karoo has lost twice. It has sacrificed a treasure, and it has acquired an eyesore. At least Baker has a stream of Joburg pet owners on the supply side. Co-Baron John Donaldson, a stoere boer, a boer is a word for an Afrikaner, despite his name, returned to the Karoo from which he sprang and found kicked-down anthills spreading like hawkers' stands. He bought one demolition candidate and set it up as a home. Soon he was running a family of mini businesses, and with Baker, buying demolishables before the demolishers got them. When Darryl David phoned Baker, and Baker bellowed, "What?" Darryl nearly put the phone down. I mean, it was a bit tricky, you know. If he'd said, "Good morning, how can I help you?" it would be easier to explain. Darryl spat it out notwithstanding, and Baker, with some 90 seconds of hearing Booktown for the first time in his life, bellowed, "Yes," so heartily that Darryl's ear hurt. You can see how his version differs from mine and the exaggeration. Okay, but that is. I'll just skip to the end. One day, crowds will beat a path to the unspoiled dorps if they haven't been kicked into anthills. One day, the Richmonds of the world will rise again, like the Clarences and Franschhoeks. Those are two famous towns in South Africa. And that poetic duo, Dullstroom and Wakkerstroom. One day, Baker and Donaldson may have to be stripped of their lunacy badges, but that day ain't anytime soon. And when I pulled into Richmond on the 3rd Thursday of October, I wondered if it'd be any time in the next century. Activity taking place was modest, 87% of it being on the stoep of the old age home. This was welcome reassurance that tranquility is not dead in our frenetic era, but not the ideal start for Book Bedonnet, the first Booktown Richmond Festival. On closer inspection, a few busy people in bright red Book Bedonnet shirts were scrambling around corners of town. I felt warmly sympathetic towards them. Shame, they tried. Damn pity that no one came. Well, I've been wrong before, but this was the best wrong yet. By Saturday night, I doubt there was an unbespoken bed in 100 kilometers. Then again, not many were in use, at least not for sleeping, because that dorpy partied till dawn, and all from books. From the book bases sprang tours and jawls. Jawls is an Afrikaans word for party, and walks and talks light and heavy. Never did such a stream of GP cars turn off at the Caltex. Cape Town registrations were close behind, and the Karoo itself was magnificently represented. Okay, so that is how we started the Booktown, and that was the first article. And then I just want to tell you a bit about Peter Baker and I. So I won't read it, but I'll tell you the story, because last night I heard some of you telling similar stories. By year 2, Booktown Richmond was really hot property. But for some reason, the townspeople approached Peter and said, Baker, you drop Darryl. You work with us, and you'll have no problems. You'll have our 100% support. And Peter Baker told them, Darryl David brought the idea to Richmond. I will not desert him. Whoever you want to say, lie about, and say brought the idea, I'm not going to buy that story. And so from year 2, the poison was set in the town. It wasn't our doing. It was people trying to steal a big idea. And they had the gall in year 5 to approach me and to say, Darryl, drop Baker. You work with us. You'll have all our support, funding, etc. And you know, Peter Baker, he taught me one word in life. I'm a person, I never swear, never ever swear. But he taught me one word that was so beautiful, I couldn't help but use it. He taught me the word unfucking believable. And I thought it had such a poetic ring to it, you know. And so I typed in on the email, just one word to them, unfucking believable. You know, that's my only sin in life during this whole journey. And so, you know, that we survived for so long and that the Booktown is such a success. It is despite the odds. Because if you don't have a town supporting you, it's very difficult. You know, time heals wounds, and of course, death helps, takes away people, the people who were your enemies. But, it's still there. It's still there, and that's what you need to know about how Booktown Richmond started. Okay. And I also want to just share, you know, sometimes I have a habit of saying the most inappropriate things. The most inappropriate, our most famous constitutional court judge is Albie Sachs. And he was, the apartheid secret police sent a letter bomb to him. And he lost his arm, and he lost an eye in that. And so he came to Richmond, which is a big deal. It was a big deal. He's the most famous, and he had just won the biggest prize that year. And when he came to the front, my favorite phrase is, ladies and gentlemen, give him a hand. And you know, the man had no hand. He just had a shirt, and you know, to his credit, Albie Sachs, you know, made light of it and laughed about it, but you know, I could have gotten into a lot of trouble for that. But I want to read another example to you of what happened at a book festival in my hometown. We called it the Midlands Literary Festival in my hometown of Howick. I'm going to read this passage. Another moment I have never forgotten pertains to the Zulu writer Musa Zulu, a contributor to the short story anthology Tilling the Soil, stories about disability. Now, Musa must have really loved the evening, because after the talks, he decided to go out and party. This is a man in a wheelchair. He got back so late he could not get into his guest house. He tried calling me around 2 a.m., but I was fast asleep. So was the guest house owner. I literally started sweating with panic after I listened to his various frantic voice messages. And his last message said that he had to sleep in his car. I was dead. I could see the front page headline in our local newspaper, The Witness. Disabled black writer forced to spend night in car. The Midlands meander would withdraw their funding. My career as an organizer of book festivals was over. I tried calling Musa, but his phone was off. He was to be the first talk of the morning. For all I knew, he might have driven home in a fit of rage. How will we fill that session? When I got to Yellowwood, the place where we hold the festival, I found Musa enjoying a sumptuous breakfast. To my surprise, he was all hale and hearty, with steaming coffee in his hand. I wanted to apologize, but how could I say what needed to be said in front of all these writers? I decided to slip away and wait for Musa in the hall. The only problem is that he was not a man to arrive early. And so we met on stage. Before I handed over the microphone, I whispered, "I'm so sorry about last night." And then Musa started his talk about what happened last night. The festival was ruined. I kept thinking to myself, I'm dead. But instead of launching into a tirade, Musa Zulu started to thank me. I could not believe what my ears were telling me. Musa Zulu, who had to sleep in his car, was thanking me because as he reclined in his seat, he was able to see the stars in the sky, maybe for the first time. And he spoke of life's unexpected joys. And at that moment, I felt like crying. I wanted to hug this man. As I type these words, I have tears in my eyes. When this book is published, I must thank Musa and send him a complimentary copy. As long as I live, this will rank as one of the greatest moments on my word journey. Okay, so those are just some of the highlights of this journey so far. Okay, just remind me what time I'm supposed to finish? 11:30. Ish. Okay. So let me just go to, I'm skipping a bit. Okay, page 9. I call this chapter A Bolt from the Blue. Okay, page 94. It was around this time that I entered my psychic period. Now, I assure you, dear reader, this is not some fictionalized memoir. It is based on real events. It most probably started on a normal Saturday morning soon after the spring of 2011. I had just been down to feed the donkeys when the heavens opened up. I had seldom witnessed a storm like this. In literally a minute, I had transformed into a quasi-waterfall. I had to bolt from the donkey's enclosure back to the house. When I got back inside, my first thought was to remove all my clothes because I was drenched to the skin. But before I could get a towel from the bathroom, my daughter started shouting for me from the top of the stairs. I told her I needed a towel, but this child is so insistent. She needed to speak to me there and then. As I stood at the bottom of the stairs, I found myself standing in a huge puddle of water that had dripped from my clothes. Just as my daughter was about to tell me of what was so urgent, the gods roared as though they were angry, and I heard the lightning crack like a whip. At that moment, I felt the lightning travel through my body. You see, we had a thatch home in Howick with no lightning conductor. The lightning entered my body from the top and bottom of my body. In a split second, I felt a stream of current travel through my feet and hit my coccyx area like a hammer. And from the top, I did not really feel it travel like that until it hit my heart. Once it hit my heart and coccyx, it seemed to leave my body. I looked all over my body to see if my body had been burnt or was smoking like in the movies. Miraculously, I seemed to be fine, except for a terrible ache around my heart and coccyx. It took days to clear. When I told my wife and daughter that I had been struck by lightning, they acted as though it was not possible. But I swear I was struck by lightning that day. Years later, lightning struck our telephone and blew the connection on the wall straight off. Another time, it just missed my wife on the bed. Of course, now when people poke fun at my hair, I joke and tell them that it is as a result of being struck by lightning. Or when they ask me how is it that I have so much of energy for so many book festivals, I tell them that I am supercharged. Okay, so that is just a moment from part of the history. I want to go to Wigton now, page 158. Okay, I'm skipping lots. Wigton calling and a rude interruption. About a month later, I got a call from a total stranger, a man with a very British accent. He introduced himself as Adrian Turpin, director of Wigton. I said Wigtown at that point, Scotland's national book town. He had apparently read about me in an article I had written around 2008, where I said how much I admired the Scots when it came to innovation in cultural tourism, and how Wigton had been an inspiration to me in founding the book town Richmond in South Africa. He then went on to ask whether I would accept an invitation to come to Wigton. At that point, the heavens opened up over Howick. A man who had been walking past our house along the river decided to get through our electric fence and seek refuge under our donkey's shelter. Adrian was just getting to the point where he was going to explain who would fund this invitation when I saw this intruder cutting thick slices of polony and trying to feed my donkeys. Okay, I thought to myself, he seems harmless enough and kind. No need to worry. He just needs shelter from the rain. And then he took down his pants. I was horrified. I could not believe what I was seeing. I was petrified for my poor donkeys. But what could I do? I was on the most important call of my life. Adrian, I think there's someone trying to break into my house. I can't talk right now. I will call you back. I couldn't tell him the truth, that a man was trying to feed my donkey's polony and then dropped his pants. I immediately canceled the call, opened the door to the deck and shouted. A whole lot of characters, you know what I said. Unfucking believable. Forgive me, mother, but that man had it coming. When the man heard me shout and saw me running down the steps, he hastily tried to put his pants on. I called my menacing St. Bernard and said, "Let's go, Fudge." Luckily for the man, I am not known for my athletic prowess, and by the time we got to the gate to the donkeys area, he already had 1 foot through the electric fence. The first thing I did was check my donkey's hindquarters. You know what I mean. And then I looked at the polony to see if there was anything strange on it before I threw it over the fence. That darned electric fence never worked. A few minutes later, I phoned Adrian back. I danced a Scottish jig of joy when I heard he wanted to invite me and he would pay all my costs. Moreover, he wanted me to be the honorary guest of their 20th anniversary celebrations. However, there was this nagging guilt eating away at me. Peter Baker. How could I go and leave Peter behind? So I explained the situation to Adrian. No problem, we will pay for Peter's airfare as well. You know, these British guys and their pounds, 25 to 1. That is what 25 to 1 does. Okay, I can't begin to tell you how much that invitation meant to me. To be ostracized in the country of your birth, as I experienced in Durban, and then to have someone like Booktown, Scotland, value your work so much that they would invite you thousands of miles across oceans to be part of their 20th anniversary celebration. Now that was something truly special. No, it was a godsend, the hand of God. I love that phrase. Yes, I do not go to church, and yes, I said unfucking believable, but somewhere between the 3 books on churches and being an evangelist of the book, the gods must surely have wanted to send me a message. Keep going. Now, what I'm talking about with Durban is when I skipped the part about where I created a UNESCO City of Literature in Durban. And when we were on the brink of, had created it, I got a call from the mayor, not me, she sent it via someone, to say that they will not tolerate an Indian being the director of a UNESCO City of Literature. Durban is known as the Kingdom of the Zulu. And so she said I must resign. And I told her that I will not resign and you must fire me. And Adrian's invitation came soon after they worked me out and kicked me out of that position after we created Durban as a... And only until about 2 years ago, they couldn't even get a website done. Now at least they've started a festival. But Durban remains one of the lowest moments on this journey. So the UNESCO City of Literature is one of the other areas of literary tourism. It's the counterpoint to the book town. The book town is a small town. The UNESCO city is a big citywide project, much larger in scale. The Wigton Literary Festival. Let me get this out of the way and say this straight out. This was before I got invited to New Zealand, but I'll stand by it until I see otherwise. Wigton is the greatest literary festival on earth. I admit I am prone to exaggeration, but my gut tells me there is nothing finer out there in the world than the Wigton Literary Festival. The crowds, the sheer joy of festival goers, the volunteers. Wow, now that is what you call ambassadors. Of course, I hadn't met Martin by then. They drive over 2 hours to pick you up in Glasgow and still are so pleasant to you on the way back. Everywhere we turned, people were so friendly. You had to make an excuse to get away from them to get something to eat. And then the special room for writers to hang out. Nothing new, I know, but having it upstairs from Wigton's iconic bookshop makes it just that much more special. We saw castles, we saw ruins, not because we had a hired car, no, because the volunteers took a liking to us and really wanted to show us a good time. Hell, after 1 year, they tried to send me packing in Richmond. Here, we were made to feel like we belonged after a few days. Balm for the soul, balm for this weary soul. And our guest house during this festival, wow, what lovely people. If ever you go there, please stay at Ford Bank House. Your hosts will be David, I hope still, and Leslie. If you hurry, you will find their gorgeous Irish setter Reuben there. My wife fell in love with Reuben. We want to return there someday just to see that dog. He loved us, I could tell. He wanted to sleep in our room every night. We tried to tell David it was all right, but he always thought the dog would be a nuisance. David is a great chef, scrumptious breakfast, and a concert pianist, so the house always was alive with music from his grand piano. How can we ever thank people like this? But the festival itself, I will never forget 2 writers. John Connell, who I rate as the most gifted young writer with his book simply entitled The Cow Book. Never again will there be a better book on cows that somehow also manages to smuggle in the theme of a father-son relationship and mental health and so much more. And then the mountain madman Cameron McNeish, with his breathtaking book on the Scottish Munros. Their talks were sublime. And there was also an unconventional bishop on the program. If I had the money, I would go there every year. Why? If I had money to spare, I would buy a house in Wigton. And to end their festival, they have something called a ceilidh, I pronounce it right? A traditional Scottish dance. Wow, these Scots really know how to throw a party. Take my word for this. The Wigton Literary Festival is the greatest book festival on earth. Okay, I'm worried about time, so I want to go to the PowerPoint, and I want to give you an indication of, okay, so this is all part of the book. Will it come up? Okay, so this is the town of Craddock. This is where I organize my Olive Schreiner Festival, okay? In an old street with old Victorian houses dating back to the 1800s, okay? That's my daughter when she was about 4 or 5 years old, just giving you a sense. And you can't see it nicely over there, but that's the house that I bought in Craddock. The one thing that you must know about me, I very seldom have money. That's because I own a lot of houses. I have a weakness for houses. Some men have a weakness for women. I tell my wife, I have a weakness for houses. Okay, this is Olive Schreiner country. Now you can see what the Karoo looks like from these photos. Semi-desert area. And you can see in the second photograph from the top, me standing against a dome. Now that is what is called Olive Schreiner's sarcophagus. When she died, she asked to be buried on the highest mountain peak in Cradock. And every year when we host the festival, it's a pilgrimage for us. We take every festival goer to the top. Okay, sorry, you can't see it, but if it was swiveled, in the book I have it as a whole page. You can see the desert area, and this is all Cradock. The first one is when I was young. That is the Schreiner Museum in Cradock. And the rest of the photos showing we had to walk from the bottom to the top of that mountain peak. Okay, so this is all Schreiner. Okay, that photograph, why it's important, there's a photograph of Olive Schreiner taken in the early 1900s, standing with her husband on that very same rock. So we took the photograph there because, you know, we speak about the spirit of place. That is the importance of the spirit of place. This is, you can see when I had less gray hair. Okay. And the wonderful story about this, but I won't, you can read it in the book. And those are my hosts at the top. The thing that you need to understand about my book festivals, they are started with no money. We have no money. I know it's foreign to most people, but we somehow manage to get festivals off the ground with no money through kindness of people like this. And then once we get it started, we inevitably do find funding. You can see the terrain, what we have to climb to get up there. Okay, and that's the photograph with the plaque. What draws me to Olive Schreiner is her love of dogs. And she's buried in that sarcophagus with not just one, she had many dogs that she always called Nita. So there's many Jack Russell dogs buried with her called Nita in that grave. Okay, this is my Howick Festival in my hometown. The top photograph is, you all won't know him, but he's a man called Bruce Fordyce. He is the king of ultra distance running, has won the Comrades Marathon in South Africa 10 consecutive times or something like that. The greatest runner of all times. Okay, these are just to give you a sense of the festive atmosphere at the different festivals. The photograph at the bottom, the African man with the sunglasses and cup of tea, that is Musa Zulu. That is at the festival when he thanked us. Okay, and the top is, if ever any of you are running a storytelling festival, Gina Mhlope is the greatest storyteller that South Africa has ever known. My one dream, in Richmond we ran out of money, but we want to start a festival called Spinning a Yarn. And we want to have a storytelling festival together with a craft festival. That's what we want to hold. But we're waiting to kick the current government out of office because they are our biggest enemies. Okay. And this is just atmosphere, showing you the atmosphere. The man at the top, British people may know him, Michael Roberts, rode for the Queen, one of the greatest jockeys in the world, lives in Howick, in my hometown. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to skip through this quickly because I'm aware of time. The silver beetle at the top, that's the beetle that got us into trouble with the taxman. We had it for many years. The strange story is when my wife finally sold it, she cried so much, she kept the spare key behind, and she literally had visions of going and stealing the car back. Eventually, she made me buy the car back, and I had to pay more than what I got for it. So that is how much she loved it. And years later, we bought the second iteration of the Beetle. Okay, this is the tour to the European book towns. Okay, you can't see it nicely there, but that top photograph is one of the most iconic photographs. It's of a woman who can barely see, and she's virtually blind, and she's got a head in the book and she's reading. You need to see it in the book to appreciate it. Okay, so these are all the European book towns. For those of you who, I don't know if there's any one from the Netherlands, that's Miep van Deen, one of the earliest presidents of international. That was on my 2007 trip, and Miep was just absolutely fantastic. Without her, I couldn't have done it. You know, they have projects like bottled poetry. They put copies of poems in empty wine bottles, just ideas for book towns. Okay, I put the one of the bookseller there because in all my life I've never seen booksellers like that, except that was a Belgian book town, very beautiful bookseller. But not that any of you are not beautiful, but young and beautiful, it's not common. Beautiful photograph of this Sunday morning in one of the book towns. I think it was Redu. What is it? Is it Dhamma? I can't see it. But anyway, and this is one of my favorite photographs. This is, I don't know how you all pronounce it, Bruges or Brugge, but absolutely stunning photograph. It's a whole page in my book. Just the atmosphere on, life on the streets. That is what I tried to capture with all these book towns. And this is Redu, sorry. Very different. You can see the bricks, how different it is to the other book towns. What I noticed in this town at the time was there was a greater focus on food than on books. But maybe I was just there at the wrong time. Maybe it has changed. What we try in Richmond to do is have a greater focus on books. Okay, I don't know if you can appreciate, if you love dogs, the dog looking for a scrap from the table, it's just a beautiful photograph. And that's my daughter, and that's at the bottom, you can see our home on the Umgeni River. If I have time, I'll quickly read that story because it's a great story. But my daughter at the moment is majoring in photography. So I'm very proud of that photograph because I think my influence rubbed off on the child. This is the Breyten-Breitenbach Book Festival. I don't know how many of you know the name Breyten-Breitenbach. Time magazine described him as the greatest living Afrikaans poet, known throughout the world, imprisoned during apartheid, etc. And this is where we held the festival for him. He lives in Paris, but he lives 6 months and 6 months at a time. These are the festivals. And these are just some of the famous South African writers. This is the most famous man. Any of you have money, this is the musician David Kramer, one of the great musicians to emerge from South Africa. You can see those red shoes. He made them famous. They called veldskoene. They made in just one factory in South Africa. He turned it into a fashion icon. But he has a unique voice. Now, wherever I go, the only criteria I have for book festivals is that people must accept my dogs. If they do not accept my dogs, they will not get the book festival. The dogs travel everywhere with me because I didn't read the part for you, the story. Ever since Henry died, my St. Bernard would attack the basset hound until the day he died. And it was the trauma of Henry dying. And that is why it lives with us. I don't know if you can see my finger. My finger is crooked. I had to come out of the bath naked to save the dog from being bitten, and the tooth went right through my finger. This is all the Breyten-Breitenbach Festival. This is another aspect of literary tourism. This is what we called the Zulu Literary Museum. This was a museum. Usually in countries, you have a national writers' museum. I was asking Martin yesterday, is there a Maori writers museum? Because inevitably what happens with black writers, marginalized for years, is that they never get their rightful place in a museum. And I started a Zulu literary museum in South Africa. Till today, it's the only literary museum for African literature in the country. This was at my university. I'm very proud. It's one of the few moments people gave me money. You can see that check. I think it's about, I even have it at home, framed. I think it was 110 or 100, I can't see it exactly. 125,000. That is a lot of money. Okay, for us, that's a lot of money. This is a lady who was my lecturer and my greatest admirer. And she's dying of Parkinson's disease. And I have a chapter dedicated to her in the book, talking about how when I'm recalling my life, her life is being forgotten to her. And so I dedicate a chapter to her. This is where I originally worked, University of KwaZulu-Natal, probably the most beautiful campus in South Africa with those jacaranda trees. And there I started the country's first children's book festival. It was the most joyous book festival that I've ever organized. Yeah. Okay. I'll call it a day. If there's any questions, I'll just scroll through it if there's any questions for you. Sorry, I can't believe that time went so quickly. This is the Soweto Literary Fair, but go for it. Ask questions while I'm pressing, just so that you can see everything.
Darryl, why was the Children's Festival the most joyous festival? Can you talk us through that, please?
You know, it's just because having children in the audience as your audience, because that festival, the audience was children. We didn't do it where we interviewed the writers like you do normally. It was more about storytelling and, you know, doing funny things, and it was just, there was something unique about that festival. And I remember when a short child came up to me. He was so short he could only hug my leg. And in Afrikaans he says, Oom baie dankie. Oom baie dankie in Afrikaans means, you know, uncle. The Afrikaners they call everyone uncle. So, you know, and for someone, in all my life, no adult writer has ever come and hugged my leg. So that ranks as a pure joy to me. Okay. Any other questions?
Last another question.
Yeah.
We're very lucky. We've had wonderful support from the South Wellington District Council. That our mayor is the volunteer, as you know, for the book town festival.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and that great support from Stephen government. You see, the government is your greatest enemy.
Yeah.
Why did you say that? And what can local and central governments do to foster Richmond tourism and book town?
We are in the unfortunate position that we have a corrupt government, and they steal all the money. They stole money during COVID for the dying. If they can steal money for the dying during COVID, we as a book festival mean nothing to them. And so what we did is we reported them to what is called the public prosecutor, and to investigate them for corruption and fraud and theft. And naturally, when you do something like that, you can kiss your funding goodbye. But we had enough of them because they are rogues. You know, that's why I came and stood over here, because I want it on camera. And our wish is that we want them out of government. And when they're out of government, we believe that a new government will be far more friendly to the arts in South Africa. That is not the case at the moment. Okay.
Any more questions?
Sure. Hi, Darryl, thank you. When was the book published? You said you produced it over 14 days. When was it published? What has been its impact?
The book has been published at the end of September last year, and it has been, it's sold very well. So I self-published it because the other thing that I forgot to tell you is I had a vision that I would die at 55. tomorrow I turn 54. So everything that I do it in a hurry because I feel that time is running out. And I have reason to believe, because everything the visions that I had in that year after, at that period, all have come true. The only thing left to come true is now my death. And so I published the book, and within 2 months, I had broken even. And this book, you can see this portion of the book is the visual portion. And to produce a book with 450 color photographs is exceptionally expensive. So it sold very well, but now I've reached the stage where I've literally run out of money. I had to come to New Zealand. My dad is turning 90. I've got to prioritize so much of things that I've cut back a bit. And so after all of that, after June, I'll print in vast volumes again. But I think the book sold with not a single newspaper review of the book. The book just sold like that, and that is because people know me from all the book festivals, etc. And they just bought the book, Okay.
Connect to our online audience with the great writings. Okay, thank you.
Before you do that, can I just say, I just want to hand a copy of a book over to you, Peter, for Featherstone, for your library. And I also brought one of the other projects. I didn't have time to speak about the project. We have a book binding project. These diaries are made from, bags of potato. What do you call it? The bags. The bags are made out of paper. That is the recycled paper from potato bags. Well, not this one, but these two. So I brought it for you just to see the kind of projects, and this for your archive, something to remember me by in case I die at 55. Okay, thank you so much.
On behalf of everyone here and those of us online, I want to thank you, Darryl, for a captivating and enthralling presentation. More than a presentation, you talked about storytelling. It was very much a wonderful story of your life and all you've achieved and your dreams and everything you've done in terms of Richmond, South Africa, and everything else that you're. So we want to thank you very, very sincerely for that. You mentioned that you're a Piscean. We were very much aware that our talkers are on your birthday tomorrow. We have something for you tonight. I want to tell you what it is. The birthday at the whole of the 2024 it's booked under the Retail Festival. So, and the celebration of birthday tomorrow, I wish you of that. And so many exciting. I think last season I announced that I have 2 Piscean daughters. It's actually true that they are incurable treasures. And I think anybody involved with Booktown movement and we're all Piscean. Whatever our birthday, because we are all incurable dreamers about what we can do. And thank you for sharing how your incurable dreaming has led to some extraordinary things in South Africa, but also around the world. Toby, I know you're busy, but the miracle of online audiences has happened through Toby. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our online audiences for joining us this morning. And I also want to thank, you made a very good point that nothing can be successful in terms of a book club without support. And we've had wonderful support, as you have had in Richmond and your other ventures in South Africa. But we've had wonderful support in Peter's Book Club. I want to celebrate our volunteers, some of whom are here today. We'll see more of our volunteers this weekend. The generosity of our volunteers is legendary and wonderful. The support of our trustees then we have trustees here who not only in an unpaid capacity make everything to do with things and books on heaven, but our trustees have been here this morning and they'll be here also after this, setting up chairs and unloading vehicles and making everything happen for the launch tonight, and they do that wonderfully. I want to also thank our booksellers. I see Jennifer here, and we met the booksellers last night, but they've been wonderfully supported all the way through. And I want to thank especially our council. Thank you, Martin. Lovely to see you here, Tanya. But the South Wairarapa District Council from day one has been supported as a destination Wairarapa. Thank you, Anna, for making the time to come along this morning. So we are very, very lucky. And we're also lucky to have Mary, who's been ministering first aid this morning and is now pivoting to arranging the alcohol and the glasses and the food and everything for tonight. But from here, delegates, you have treats because you're off to Greytown, charming, wonderful, vibrant village of Greytown, which is 10 minutes up the road. Of course, we'll be going to Martinborough. That's tomorrow, isn't it? Or, no, someday. It's Martinborough. Tomorrow, I think we've got Martinborough stories, haven't we? Yeah, so talking about storytelling, we're going to Lake Ferry and Manawhenua. They're going to share these stories, and you're quite right, that often these stories aren't told. And so we'll be hearing some of those wonderful stories tomorrow, and also tomorrow we'll hear more stories at the Puhi at Papawaipapa. So that's just part of the program for our delegates. You're very lucky. So enjoy Greytown, and then you're back this afternoon for the farm tour at Waironga Station. And again, the Matthews family have been very generous to get the book done, hosting us there. And then, of course, we have the launch of the festival program here tonight at 6:30 p.m. So, Darryl, thank you. And thank you all for coming, either in person or online. Kia ora tātou, have a lovely day. Thank you.
It's just a short 2-minute disco. And I have 2 books for anyone over here.